Hey guys, Ryan Sprague here, host of Somewhere in the Skies, and I just wanted to let you know about an awesome event that I'm going to be partaking in on June 28th and June 29th. Small Town Monsters presents Monsterfest 2. The event takes place in downtown Canton, Ohio. Backed by popular demand, Monsterfest 2 will include Small Town Monsters panels, Q&As with guests, Small Town Monsters film premieres, meet and greets with people like me and other authors, other podcasters, and so much more. And if you have kids under the age of 12, they get in for free. So I hope you'll join me and so many others at Monsterfest 2, taking place June 28th and June 29th in Canton, Ohio. To learn more and to get your tickets, visit smalltownmonsters.com. Again, that's smalltownmonsters.com. And I'll see you at Monsterfest 2. During a drive home to rural South Dakota, 27-year-old Mike Foss witnessed a strange glowing object one cold November evening in 1976. But this wasn't the end of the encounter by far, because when he arrived home, he realized that whatever the object was, it had not only followed him home, but was now hovering directly above him. And this was only the beginning of the Foss family UFO encounters.
This is Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague.
Mike Foss was living at his parents' home on a farm they owned around 7 miles south of Milbank, South Dakota. He had unfortunately recently dealt with a divorce, and while once in architectural design, a physical disability put him in a less strenuous part-time job as a switchboard operator for the Milbank Police Department. Ultimately though, perhaps because of this job, he was viewed as a very credible witness. Perhaps even more so when it was factored in that his father, Norman Foss, also spent almost 20 years as a South Dakota highway patrolman. It was around 6:30 p.m. on November 27th when Mike Foss set off home following a visit to an auto body shop in Milbank. Although it was still early evening, the temperature was already almost below zero. It was as he was heading along Highway 77 that he became aware of a tremendously bright, brilliant orange light, which he described as a light without a source overhead on his right-hand side. He kept his attention on the glowing object for the next few minutes, eventually coming to a turn onto a graveled country road towards his parents' farmhouse. It was as he turned onto this road that he realized the object, whatever it was, appeared to be hovering over a field at the roadside. At this point, although he remained inside the vehicle and kept the engine running, he brought the car to a stop so that he could take a closer look. To begin with, he thought the object was most likely a helicopter, perhaps a police helicopter on patrol or looking for someone. However, the more he watched it, the more he realized that whatever he was watching was something a little bit more out of the ordinary. This realization suddenly flooded his mind with fear as he immediately stepped on the gas and continued on his way to his parents' farmhouse. He decided that as soon as he got home, he would inform his parents of what he'd seen, and then return with them to this location to watch the object further. Even before he had reached the driveway of his parents' house, Mike was blaring the horn of his car to get his parents' attention. He brought the car to a stop with a screech and ran inside as fast as he could, calling out to his mother and father. He urged them to come with him, telling them as quickly as he could about what he'd seen. They came to the front door, and Mr. Foss followed his excited son outside to his car. However, Before they could set off, Mike stopped suddenly in his tracks. There, in front of them and above them, approximately 100 feet ahead, was the object that Mike had seen on the lonely road only a short time earlier. From this distance, he and his father could see that the object was distinctly egg-shaped, with different colored flashing lights on the top half that seemed to melt into one another. And at the bottom of the craft, it had a blue glow. His mother soon followed them outside, and the three of them watched the object for between 20 to 25 minutes. It remained between the hog house of the farm and the barn before it began to move away from them calmly and steadily, eventually disappearing into the distance. The entire Foss family didn't know what to make of this episode, but all agreed that they had definitely seen something extraordinary. And although they didn't know it yet, this would not be the end of the strange events for the Foss family. Over the coming days and weeks, UFO investigators began to examine this case, and further details would surface. For example, Mr. Foss recalled that just before his son arrived home, he had been watching television when it suddenly began to act up, with the screen rolling vertically. Mr. Foss would further offer that the television only usually acted in such a way during high winds, when the antenna was blown significantly, making him think that at the time, a sudden wind had been riled up. Also of interest, by the time they returned inside, following the object's disappearance, the television reception returned to normal. It was also Mr. Foss who brought about the realization that the object must have remained completely silent throughout the encounter. He recalled that when he first went outside following Mike's arrival home, he could immediately hear the sound of the traffic on the highway around 2 miles away. What's more, he could also hear a passing airplane, and even recalled seeing its wing lights. Given that he could clearly hear these other sounds, if the object, which was much closer, had been making any noise whatsoever, he surely would have heard it, as would have Mike and Mrs. Foss. Both Mr. Foss and Mike also recalled that the entire yard was lit up by the glow of the object. Incidentally, Mrs. Foss had watched the events through the kitchen window through a pair of opera glasses. In fact, she continued to watch the object as it drifted off into the distance. She claimed that after several moments, it appeared to come to a stop and emit several red balls of light from its side. These balls of light floated away from the object in various directions. As she was looking at one of these balls of light, it suddenly stopped before just exploding noiselessly into nothing. By the time Mike and Mr. Foss had returned inside, the object had all but disappeared. Mike would also state that despite feeling the initial surge of fear when he witnessed the object, when he viewed the object a second time, much more close up, he actually felt no fear whatsoever, elaborating that he simply felt that anyone who could produce a thing like that could have harmed him easily the first time if it had hostile intentions. Over the days and weeks that followed, Mike began to have strange, recurring dreams, in which he found himself alone on a hilltop on a strange planet with a purple sky. As he was standing there, he could see strange vehicles moving through the sky, elaborating that some are silver, some are black, and there seems to be a war going on. He was always left with a feeling, particularly when he had this dream, that the strange object he had witnessed would someday return. And he was right. I'm Ryan Sprague.
And I'm Andrew Sanford.
And we love pro wrestling.
It's the best!
Headlocks, elbow drops,
scathing promos, and chair shots.
We just can't get enough of it. So we started a podcast.
You can join Ryan and me as we dig into the ins and outs of pro wrestling like the rabid fans we are.
We've got interviews, previews, predictions, news, and so much more. And we're going to cover all of it on Somewhere in the Ring.
Oh, yeah.
Is that supposed to be Macho Man?
No good?
We'll work on it. Join us every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts, for all new episodes. And we'll see you somewhere in the ring.
Somewhere in the Ring is part of the eOne Podcast Network.
Between November 27th and December 11th of 1976, the object returned a further 3 times. The first 2 of these sightings were made from a distance. The third time, however, the object was much closer. Just as close, in fact, as it had been the first time the Foss family had seen it. And it once more hovered between the hog house and the barn. In fact, this third incident played almost exactly the same as the first encounter, with the object remaining in view for around 25 minutes before heading off into the distance. On this occasion, though, by pure chance, Mike's automatic police radio band scanner was switched on. As soon as the object appeared, a burst of static took over the bandwidth. The frequency had locked in on frequency 7, which is the frequency used by the Minnesota Highway Patrol. At this point, Mike called Milbank Police to report the events, and a patrol car was sent to the property. Police Chief Ben Omston arrived at the Foss property a short time later. However, by the time he did so, the object had retreated considerably and was now nothing more than a dim glow in the distance. The officer did, though, state in his report that he was approaching the property. He had noticed a strange orange glow and that it appeared to dim somewhat over several seconds, as if whatever was causing the glow was heading away from the property. Also, during this particular sighting, other corroborating witnesses were found. Don Adams, a bartender at a local pub around 2.5 miles away from the Foss property, and his wife did indeed see the object close to the KMSD radio tower. Despite this, investigators considered the possibility that the sightings were nothing more than a highly exaggerated sighting of none other than the planet Venus. After all, Venus was quite prominent in the southwest sky at the time. However, when investigators ventured outside with the Fosses to point out where Venus was and to ask if this is what they might have seen, Mike responded with certainty that they had already noticed Venus, stating that it is definitely not what they had seen. Considering the radio interference, investigators also checked around the property and near the hog house and barn for any increased levels of radiation, and they discovered that nothing unusual was detected. There were, though, several other intriguing details surrounding these mysterious sightings. The day after the last sighting, on December 12th, the family's 7-year-old German Shepherd suddenly fell ill. He was examined by a veterinarian the following day, who determined that the dog had some kind of stroke. Further examination seemingly showed that one of the animal's veins had just stopped working. Ultimately, the dog did pass away that very same day. Whether or not this was a coincidence or a consequence of it being in the vicinity of the apparent otherworldly object remains unknown. Also of interest to investigators was a huge 30-foot high and 20-foot wide steel silo used to store grain that sat in the family's barn. According to the original report, it was Mr. Foss who first mentioned the silo, and whether or not it had some kind of connection to the repeated sightings. This silo was made from heavy pieces of boilerplate that had been riveted together. Mr. Foss further contemplated that the object, or specifically the intelligence guiding it, had taken an interest in the metallic structure, perhaps through some kind of advanced metal detecting technology, and the intelligence was concerned it might be a weapon of some kind. Investigators also highlighted a UFO encounter that had taken place off the coast of California almost 2 decades earlier in 1957, when a crew member on board the USS Ramsey spotted and photographed a UFO that appeared very similar to the object described by the Foss family. Ultimately, whatever the Foss family witnessed over the period of several weeks in 1976 remains a mystery. And whether Mike Foss or his family experienced any further strange encounters in the years that followed, perhaps ones that went unreported, also remains unknown. That they saw something strange on those 4 evenings in the fall of 1976 was very apparent. However, perhaps not least as Officer Amsden and Don Adams and his wife also saw what appeared to have been the very same object during the last sighting. So we have to ask if it really was just a coincidence that the Foss family witnessed what would appear to be the same UFO on 4 separate occasions, twice in close proximity in the exact same place on the property, or whether there was some other unknown, perhaps predetermined reason for the appearance of this strange craft. We also might contemplate just where this craft came from. Is it, as some believe, a vehicle from another world? Or might it be a top-secret military vehicle? If the latter is true, then we have to ask once more, for what purpose were these otherwise seemingly random appearances? As is most often the case, there are many unanswered questions, and many avenues of thought and speculation we could go down with this case. Whether any further information surfaces on the Foss family UFO encounter, or whether an investigator or researcher spots a detail that has so far been overlooked, remains to be seen as well. It is, however, a case that will continue to fascinate those with an interest in getting to the heart of the UFO mystery, somewhere in our skies. This episode was researched by Marcus Loth. To learn more, visit ufoinsight.com. Please take a moment to rate and review Somewhere in the Skies on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It helps us tremendously to gain visibility and find new listeners. Thank you to our podcast network, LIONSGATE Sound, and a very special thank you to you for listening. We'll see you here next week. And remember, keep your feet on the ground, but never stop searching somewhere in the skies.
This has been a production of LIONSGATE Sound. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever possible. Thank you for listening.